Sometime life imitates art, and sometimes art imitates life, and sometimes art imitates life, imitating art, imitating life. Anyway, on today's episode of Life's Potluck Buffet, we've got two imaginary places, one of which is real. You curious? Well, stick around for episode 312 of Life's Potluck Buffet, only on YouTube. I'm John Paulus, your host for today and every day. If you're enjoying Life's Potluck Buffet, please subscribe. If you've already subscribed, thank you for subscribing. If you have a Brave browser, you can now show your love of Life's Potluck Buffet by contributing basic attention tokens to Life's Potluck Buffet with John Paulus on YouTube. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening. Okay, I'm going to give you two place names. One of these places was a real place that became more famous for being a fictional place, and one of them was a fictional place that has now become a real place officially. So the first is a case of art imitating life, and the second is a case of life imitating art. All right, here are the places: Xanadu and Shangri-La. Okay, so which one was a real place and which one was a fictional place to start out? Do you have any guesses? Okay, well, I'll explain. Let's start with Shangri-La. Shangri-La is a place that was created by the author James Hilton, who wrote a book called Lost Horizon. And this was in 1933. And the book has in it, it's a fantasy, adventure, fiction, utopian, dystopian novel. And it takes place at some point beyond the western Himalayas in the Kunlun mountain range, which is in Tibet, but really far west in Tibet. So near places that would be in the northern parts of modern day India and that area. And it takes place around this monastery that is called Shangri-La. And for that setting, James Hilton, and we have some interviews with him, used the travel logs of two French abbots, Abbé Uc and another Frenchman whose name's not as fun to say, and they traveled at some point in the 1840s between Beijing and Lhasa. And he says that he was inspired by their travel accounts, which he read in the British Library, and so that inspired him to come up with the setting for this magical and strange place called Shangri-La. Now, it has to be said that none of the travels of the French abbots were anywhere near the Kunlun Mountains. Lhasa is a really long way east of the Kunlun Mountains. And so the journey from Beijing to Lhasa would not include the places in the Kunlun Mountains. So that obviously says that this place is a kind of a fantasy place that is fictionally created out of accounts of real mountain adventures, but not really any specific place in particular. And so the attempts to find Shangri-La are always going to end up not finding anything, since it's a pastiche of places traveled in the mountainous areas of Tibet. And so it's not really, you can't really find Shangri-La. I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, or if James Hilton was aware of Shambhala, which is a spiritual city in Buddhism where a future Buddha will arise, and that people think that that is modeled on the city of Sambal, which is actually in northern India. So it's kind of interesting that Shangri-La is kind of edging that way, and the spiritual city of Shambhala is in the grand scheme of things that way. I mean, it's not really that close, but yeah, it edges towards it. Okay, so that's but you can. I mentioned life imitating art, so even though you can't find the original Shangri-La, you can find and visit Shangri-La City, because the city of Zhongdian, or Jiaotang, I think is how you say it in Tibetan. But if you speak Tibetan, please let me know how to actually say the name of the name of this city. And that apparently means Royal Plains, and it's a city that was renamed for Shangri-La and is now called Shangri-La City. And so if you want to visit Shangri-La, you can now visit it. So there you have life imitating art. Now, in the case of art imitating life, we have Xanadu. Now, Xanadu, first of all, I have to thank friends for the letting me borrow the cult classic Xanadu on DVD, which is from 1980 with Olivia Newton-John and Gene Kelly and others, and that is well, just check it out. So that's the movie Xanadu. Now that references the poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge from over 150 years before the movie was made. That is starts with the line, "In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree," and Xanadu that Coleridge talks about was actually based on a real city. And it's the city of Shangdu, which was eventually became the summer capital of Kubla Khan. And Kubla Khan was the ruler of the Mongolian Empire that was the emperor of the Yuan dynasty of China in Chinese history. And this was before Kublai Khan moved the capital to Khanbalik, which is modern day Beijing. So that gives you a sense of around where we're talking about. Now we have an account of Marco Polo, the Venetian traveler who was at Kublai Khan's court and talked about the goings on at Shangdu. Talks a lot about there are a lot of falcons involved and kind of hunts and things like that, and feeding of falcons and hawks with stuff from the hunts. Anyway, so that gives you a sense of this this area, that becomes this summer palace, and there's lots of summer activities, I guess, involving falcons and hawks. And the account of Marco Polo is actually another author's account of heard from Marco Polo. So it's a kind of literary version of Marco Polo's accounts. Marco Polo was traveling with his father and uncle, actually. It was their second visit to this area of what is Inner Mongolia in the modern nation state of China. And that account was written in a French Italian dialect. So Italian dialect of French. And it was also written in a couple of other languages. So do we have a sense that this account from Marco Polo is of Shangdu is the account of a person who really did visit Kublai Khan's court and spent a lot of time in this area. That is pretty clear. Now, is every single thing going to be like, the exact thing that happened? No, this is not. Remember, this is Marco Polo's account to somebody else who wrote down the account. So there's going to be some stuff that gets lost in that process. And also, there's all sorts of misrememberings and things like that. So are we saying this is some sort of videotape recording of what went on at Xanadu? No. But did a place that was called, Xanadu, or something close to that, Xanadu is an anglicization of it, of Shangdu and other similar names is what it was called. Did that exist? Yes. And so Xanadu is actually art imitating life, because Coleridge's poem and the accounts of various others are based on seemingly a real life place, and they're artful and fantastical, and in the case of Coleridge, opium fueled, because he was on painkillers at the time, apparently because of an illness. Anyway, the artistic accounts of Xanadu. So, let's ask the cards about all of this, and maybe they'll have a fitting card for our discussion today. So, yellow lemons, blue dumplings, magenta noodles. Cards, tell us something where life can imitate art. Nope, it's card 33. Call on a friend. Ask someone to say what they perceive your strengths to be, and if they would be willing for you to say what you think their strengths are. If no one's around, then just wait until you run into somebody. And that's kind of fitting, because that's the story of Coleridge's poem, is that he woke up from this sleep induced by the painkillers, and was trying to remember this dream that he had about Xanadu and Kublai Khan, and because he had been reading an account of it, and he got down some lines, but then there was a visitor from a nearby town who interrupted his memory of the dream, and so he could only, in the end, remember a few lines of it, and that's the whole story behind the poem. So I guess a friend must have dropped by. I don't know if Coleridge asked what he thought his strengths were, or vice versa, but nonetheless, they probably talked about something. Well, we'll talk about something again tomorrow on Life's Potluck Buffet. See you then.